This episode is brought to you by the European Coworking Assembly. We are everything Coworking Europe. If you head to the Coworking Assembly website, you can connect with our Rural Coworking, European Freelancers Week, Coworking Symposium, Coworking Library, and Coworking Tools.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another swashbuckling episode of the Co-working Values podcast. And today in the studio, we have Stacey. Stacey, what are you known for, and what would you like to be known for?
So I run a co-working space in rural Devon for female entrepreneurs, which I've been doing since 2020. But in my day job, I am a professional blogger, freelance writer, and journalist, and I specialize in interior design.
What's that word we were talking about before you came on?
Biophilic design.
Biophilic design. Listen, ladies and gentlemen, you need to keep an eye out for. Can you explain what that is? Because and just for the future of this podcast, folks, we've been talking for ages, very excited about so many things, and some of them are going to make it into this podcast. And I'd like to be more professional, but there's so much to talk about. What is biophilic design, Stacey?
So it comes from the Greek terms bios and philia. So bios means life and philia means a love of. So it's basically bringing that love of nature into the built environment, which is good for our mental health and well-being.
It is. There's the. Is it tribes or tribe?
What, my co-working space?
Yeah, I don't want to misrepresent it.
Yeah, the tribe.
The tribe is. Can you explain about it? Because it's not 14 floors in a glass office building, is it?
No, it's tiny. So apparently I was interviewed by Yvonne Poussier for the Sisters in Arms book that she wrote about female co-working spaces around Europe. And she told me that it is the smallest female-only co-working space in Europe. So it's 45 square meters and we have 8 desks over 2 small offices. So it is like super, super tiny. And it's aimed at female entrepreneurs. Initially, it was aimed at creative female entrepreneurs because I wanted to kind of make it a space where I wasn't going to have too many people on calls or doing sales calls just because we don't have the space for private offices or booths. But obviously, since the pandemic, it's opened out to people who are employed as well because now so many people are working from home. But yeah, it's a micro space. And I set it up because I wanted to... Well, it's changed over the 3 years that it's been open, but now it's to help women overcome some of those systemic and societal barriers that they face to starting and growing businesses. So when I first started thinking about opening a co-working space, it was around about this time that the UK government commissioned Alison Rose, who's the CEO of NatWest, to do a report into the state of female entrepreneurship in the UK. And that report came up with 5 main barriers that women face to starting and growing businesses. And I had actually faced a lot of those obstacles myself. I knew a lot of other women who'd faced them. And I thought maybe in starting my own co-working space for female entrepreneurs, I could help in some way to overcome some of those barriers. Obviously, I couldn't solve them because, like I say, a lot of them are systemic, but I could do something to help. So those barriers were awareness and access to finance, which I definitely had an issue with that. I had no idea that there was even a possibility to get finance to open a co-working space until somebody brought that up after I'd already opened. Another one is risk awareness. Women are generally a bit more risk aware than men. And actually 55% of women cite the fear of going it alone as to why they don't start their own business. There's a perceived missing skills and experience gap. So imposter syndrome. Women often think they don't have what it takes to start a business. Obviously, there's a disproportionate primary care responsibility as we're dealing with the children or other family members. And then the main one for me was the lack of relatable sponsors, role models, mentors, and professional support networks. And I really felt that living in rural Devon, I had really felt over my career that there was this definite lack of a professional support network. So I just wanted to start a space that could help address some of those issues.
The childcare thing is huge because
massive.
I'd be very interested in your take on this because I was amazed that when the pandemic hit, it seemed like we went back 50 years.
Yeah.
What was your experience of that?
God, I felt like I was having a breakdown trying to juggle 2 businesses and all the homeschooling. Because I was lucky enough that my husband could still work through that. He works outdoors in people's gardens, so he was able to still work even though the restrictions were in place. So the homeschooling did fall to me. So trying to keep 2 businesses afloat and homeschool my children just felt impossible. I lost all my work, my freelance writing work and my blogging work at that time. All the advertising was pulled from my blog. So that was a massive shock to the system. And then obviously I had to close the co-working space. I'd only been open for 2 months at that point. So hadn't really got any real momentum going, even though I'd been building the community for 4 or 5 months before we even opened. I still felt a massive sense of dread of having to shut the doors at those very, very early stages. So it definitely felt like we'd gone backwards. And the stats show it actually in the women's, a lot of the stats around women's employment and the rates of women setting up businesses suffered and moving out of employment because they couldn't work and do all the childcare over the pandemic. And I think we've seen a big rise in women starting their own businesses recently, probably out of necessity. A lot of entrepreneurship through necessity.
Say a bit more. I know what you mean, but before I mansplain it, what do you mean by that?
Yeah. Well, for me, living here in rural Devon, our main industries here are hospitality, tourism, and a lot of those jobs were very badly hit during the pandemic. And even if women were able to work with the child caring responsibilities that came with homeschooling, a lot of them just weren't able to. And I think it made a lot of women sit back and think, I think maybe I could work for myself and get more flexibility to work around the child caring responsibilities, have a bit more freedom to choose when I work, where I work, how I work. And just realizing that perhaps there was another way to find fulfillment through work that works better with those child caring responsibilities. Yeah. And the pandemic maybe just highlighted that a little bit more.
Sorry, I've got like 20 questions to ask in one go. So the first it's not it doesn't follow on from what we just said, but the first one is so someone came to the Workspace Design Show, and I would definitely name her if I could remember who it was, and she said, "Is it okay do you think it's all right if I start a female-only workspace?" And I mean, she's smarter than I'm portraying her here, much smarter, but it was almost like she was asking permission to open a workspace that's just for women. And everyone went like, what are you doing? Get on with it, you know? But like, why? Yeah. What is going on that, and I'm very sensitive that I'm like, might sound a bit disrespectful for her, but like, what is going on that she feels she needs to ask permission to open a female-only co-working space? Did that all come out right, please?
Yes, it did. Yeah. And I totally understand where she's coming from. Absolutely. I really thought hard about this initially, and I was quite scared to do it, not because I didn't think I could, but we're seeing this amazing movement right now towards diversity and equality and inclusion. And I feel that in some ways, opening a female-only co-working space goes a little bit against that, because you're not really being inclusive to everyone. You're niching right down. And so I can imagine that she probably felt a lot of confusion and fear around that. And obviously there was that issue, was it the Wing?
Yeah.
Got in a lot of trouble, didn't they? For being exclusionary. So I think there's a lot of fear around that. I mean, I don't exclude men from my space. I just don't encourage it. I've had men come in and they do use the space, but it totally changes the dynamic of what happens and the conversations we have in the space if there are men present, and it is not the fault of the men at all.
Yeah, I know what you mean by that.
So initially there was a guy who approached me about using the space. He'd just moved to Devon from Wales, and I had the conversation with him. He'd looked at the website and phoned up and asked if he could book a desk, and I politely, tried to explain that it's a co-working space for female entrepreneurs, which didn't put him off. And then we had this great conversation, and he was just such a lovely guy, and I felt like he totally understood what I was saying to him. And I invited him in to come and have a look around because I wanted to get to know him better, because on the wall of our co-working space it says your vibe attracts your tribe. And what was super important to me in the beginning in setting up my co-working space was attracting people who share my values, and they believe in the power of community, connection, collaboration. They cheerlead for other people. They don't feel threatened by someone else's success. Like, all of those things were so important to me. And he had all of those things. He was such a great fit for our space. So he came in and he worked in our space for a while, and it actually worked out really good, because when we had to shut the doors, he still needed somewhere to work. So although I was closed and most of my clients, my customers, and my community were working mums, so they had to be at home to do all the homeschooling, so he was still able to use the space, which helped, a little bit revenue wise. But there was a noticeable change in the dynamic and in the conversation from having a man, even an amazing man, in the room. And a lot of women had said to me that they just didn't feel like they could share as openly, be as vulnerable, couldn't have the hard conversations that we needed to have in the space. And like I said, that wasn't his fault at all.
No, I really understand what you mean there. And then quite often there's so me and Janine and Jax, and there's lots of other people on the team. I work in a very female environment. Yeah. And it's taken 3.5 years to understand, or for not to understand, sorry, for situations to arise where conversations come up saying, oh yeah, there was one, I won't do the whole story, but there was one example I said of a call I went to, and I said something with another project, and they said, oh, if I'd said that, I would have been the angry old lady. If I'd been that, I would have been the lesbian with a chip on my shoulder, and if I'd been that, I would have said that, and they went through the whole thing. I was like, oh, so like you were able to say that, Bernie, because you're like the slightly privileged white dude, and I never understood that. I never realized. I probably understood it intellectually, but I never realized how, when whoever's in the room changes how much impact it can have. Yeah. And I hate saying, does that make sense? But does that make sense? Because,
Absolutely. Yeah. So, for example, a lot of the women who come into my space, I wanted it to be open to women of all ages at all stages of their business. And because the pandemic happened, I haven't really managed to hit that younger demographic that I was hoping to hit, which I would like to talk about in a second. But so the majority of the women that are coming in are sort of, my age group. So I'm 42 this year. So, for example, perimenopause and menopause is a big topic of conversation, and it absolutely affects you running a business. So we have a lot of conversations that happen around that and how to deal with that. And those conversations either wouldn't happen, or they would be very different conversations if there were men in the room. So I feel like topics like that we can discuss much more openly and vulnerably, and it does have a huge impact on running a business. And that's just one example. There's so many other examples of topics that.
Do you think? Is it just? I know, because I hang around with Kate Usher, that menopause is front and center. Or are people just talking more about that than they ever have been?
I think so. Yeah, I think there just needs to be a conversation. I think the way that we work, the way the economy runs, the way society is now is so different. It wouldn't have necessarily been such a massive issue, decades ago, when a lot more women were stay-at-home mums. But now women are leaders. They are running businesses. They are in positions of leadership. These conversations, they just need to be had. They need to be had because these kind of things affect our daily life. And trying to act as if it's not happening to you and it doesn't exist is quite damaging.
So, Stacey, what about the younger demographic in your space?
Yeah, so we don't have one at the moment. What I really wanted to do with the tribe was give the younger generations who live in this area options, because I didn't have that growing up here. So I went to a grammar school, and at grammar school, I was clearly channeled off to university as the only option, because there just weren't the jobs here. Like I said, it's mostly hospitality and retail and tourism. So we were quite clearly told that if you want to be someone, make something of yourself, do something of value, you need to go away to university and go and live somewhere else. I love where I live, absolutely love it. Not so much as a kid, because I wasn't very outdoorsy or into horse riding or sailing, but I absolutely love where I live. But I grew up thinking I had to go to London to make something of myself. And at uni, I went to university in Bath, and then I went to live in Paris for my third year, because I did French and German at uni. And then I realised, I don't think I'm a city person. I don't think I can live like this. I had a bit of a crisis then, thinking, what am I going to do? Because if I can't live in Paris, I absolutely can't live in London. That's just out of the question. I went to stay with a friend in London just to double check. And yeah, it was a definite no from me. I'm a country girl and I wanted to go home. And luckily I managed to make my own business online from those opportunities that exist now that didn't when I went to university. But I really wanted to be able to show young people who live down here, young women particularly, that there is a pathway to entrepreneurship, even if you can't see what it is because it's not very clear. And if you want to stay in this area, there are options open to you and you can explore them and not have to leave Devon to do that. And like I said, I haven't hit that mark yet. I've been so busy trying to survive the pandemic and make sure that the women I already have coming in keep coming back, that I haven't been able to focus on that goal yet of reaching out to that younger demographic. So that's definitely one of my future goals, is to help young women in rural areas realize that you do have options and you don't have to leave.
I want this to be true, but the reason I work the way I work is because when Lorena and I got married nearly 20 years ago, I was in the event industry, and I couldn't go to Argentina, which is where she's from, and just, I'm very reliable on my gob and what I say and connections and everything like that. And to go and do that in Argentina was just too big a leap at that moment in time, and I was doing very bad at learning Spanish. So then I was kind of, I wouldn't say forced, because that's a bit dramatic for a guy like me, but I had to look at a way to work remotely. And do you remember Copy Blogger? Yeah. So I was hooked on Copy Blogger from the beginning because it was a way to make money online. And now, 15 years later, it's, I can work remotely. Everything I do is remote. And I just think that people that, live where you do, it's never been easier to start a business online. And part of it is you want to be around, cool things and stuff like that. But, I want it to be, I just think it's more possible than we think it is to live in a remote location and build a business online, or at least work remotely. And is that my glossy eye thing, or do you, as someone?
No, I agree. But I just think the school system in the UK at the moment is failing us, and it's set up for a world that just doesn't exist anymore. It's not teaching our kids entrepreneurship. It's not teaching them resilience. It's not teaching them the business skills that they need in today's world, which is massively flexible. Really, the opportunities there are enormous. kids starting YouTube businesses or, being Instagram influencers, that, you could do anything these days as long as you've got the wherewithal to do it. But we're not teaching that to the kids. So a lot of the messaging that they're getting from the current system is so outdated. And I don't think they necessarily know where to look to take what they want to do forward into a sustainable business. So I think we really need to create an ecosystem outside of the school system to help young people with entrepreneurship. I've got
one more question. I often think this is not a question. This is just me shouting out things. It's like, do you remember Ken Robinson's talk on TED? Mm-hmm. It's like one of the most, I don't know if it's still number one, but it was like one of the most watched TED Talks ever, and everyone agreed with it. And I think it'd be wrong to say that it didn't have an impact on the UK education system, but it's amazing how little impact it ended up having on the UK education system, even though, he was such a champion of it. It's like everyone agreed and did nothing about it.
Yeah.
It's and I'm going to stop there because that's a whole new rant. What is so? What? I've got to pretend like I don't know this, but geez, Stacey, how could a co-working space in a location like yours facilitate young people building a career?
I think signposting is a huge thing. So, like I said, a lot of young people might not necessarily know the pathway to start a business. But in a co-working space, you can find all those people who've already discovered the pathway, and they are, further along that journey than you, whether that be just, a few short steps ahead or years ahead. And surrounding yourself with people who are already doing the thing that you want to do is invaluable. It's so invaluable. And like I mentioned before, all of those barriers, especially that women face, men have them too, but for me, I'm focusing on the women. All of those barriers, I feel like, could be dismantled to a greater or lesser degree through coming into a co-working space. I can't help too much with the childcare, but I know there are co-working spaces that offer childcaring facilities, which is amazing if you can offer that as well. But a lot of those barriers can be dismantled through finding your community and your professional support network who can be there with you along the journey. So, for example, risk awareness. You can pretty much diminish your perceived risk or your perception of the risk that you're facing by getting the support of your community who can help you talk through it, rationalize, remind you what your capabilities are, what your strengths are, how powerful you are. A lot of that is just a mindset thing, or finding the people who've had experience doing it so they can talk you through the logistics of that risk. The lack of relatable sponsors, role models, or mentors. You can't be what you can't see. So only in the Rose Review in 2019, the statistic was that only, I think it was only 30% of women already know an entrepreneur, which is really quite low. And when I think about it, I didn't know any growing up. I didn't know any women running their own business. None of my mum's friends ran their own business. None of my family members ran their own business. None of my friends' mums ran their own business. So God knows how I've ended up running too. But just knowing, just being around people doing what you want to do can have a huge impact on your ability to actually succeed with your dream. And what was the other one? The perceived missing skills and experience gap. So thinking that you haven't got what it takes. So, only 39% of women are confident in their own capabilities to start or grow a business. And it's a perceived skills and experience gap. It's not a real gap. It doesn't actually exist. It's just that you think that you don't. So it's imposter syndrome at the end of the day. It's imposter syndrome. And I know men have imposter syndrome too, but statistics show that it affects women more, 55%.
They do, but then like what they have to overcome imposter syndrome is like
it's slightly huger.
Yeah. When I walk around going, I've got imposter syndrome nowadays, but my I know, that thing about justice and equality, that
Yeah.
I'm a little bit more in tune with that. Was there anything else you wanted to add to that epic list?
I don't think so.
So
That's already a lot to kind of try and overcome, isn't it?
no, it's true. I mean,
And obviously, when I opened the co-working space, I didn't think I was going to solve any of these issues, but I just thought, what can I do now with the resources that I've got today to help work towards overcoming some of those things? And it was just so clear to me that the sort of like the core values and the guiding principles of co-working, being community, collaboration, connection, go such a long way to helping dismantle the rest of those barriers. Like if you get the right people around you, if you find your people, your tribe, your community, they will help you overcome those other barriers. So it seemed like a no-brainer to me that yes, some of these barriers are systemic and it's going to take massive seismic change from society to dismantle them completely. And we are slowly making progress there. But actually, what can we take into our own hands and do today, right now, to help overcome them?
Yep. There's it's so one of the things that sounds so simple but really struck me was Kofi from Urban MBA. I said to him after George Floyd got murdered in 2020, I was like, what can we do? And he's like, mate, just liking a few tweets is not going to do anything. You just need to do something small every day, and all this stuff is going to blow up, and everyone's going to be making change. And a lot of what we've seen, like brands saying, we're with you at this difficult time, and not quite being as with you as their version of being with you, and the people concerned's version of being with you was very, very different. And then this happens a lot is people who run co-working spaces that are not 16 floors with a helicopter pad and free beer go, oh, I can't do anything. But actually it's like the very local, small, like your space and where we are here in Vigo, in Fento is, I think it's like 2 desks bigger than your space. And there's so much magic that can happen there. And one of the things I was going to ask,
like I said to you the other day, I've had co-working imposter syndrome for 3 years. The reason I've not, reached out to you before or to some of the other people that I consider to be like serious co-working industry players is because I thought, well, I've got such a tiny space. Does it even count? Like, can I even identify as someone who is part of the co-working industry? Because it just feels like industry feels like, you'd have to be like a big important player of a certain size to be able to have opinions that matter, or which I realize is ridiculous, but that is how I felt for so long. Even though the beautiful thing about the co-working industry is that it is full of people who would never believe that about anyone else. They wouldn't, say, oh no, you're too small to have an opinion or to actually count, because it is so open and collaborative and welcoming. But I still had that sense of imposter syndrome because it's such a small space. Well,
I am a big important player, but I'm only 5'4", so it's but seriously, the thing you'll know this from just your whole career is the reason it seems bigger and important players and stuff like that is because it's the bigger companies have marketing and PR budgets. So when you type co-working and when you type co-working into a thing, like the first 5 things that come up are really big companies who have someone who understands how to play Google Ads, and they have the budget and everything like that. And they're not doing anything. Some of them are doing something wrong, but they're not doing anything wrong. They're just, that's their route to market. So everyone thinks we say this so many times. Everyone thinks the only hotels in the world are like Hilton and Best Western or something, but there's way more like indie guest houses. And I don't know about, like, sometimes you just want to, like, it's easier to stay in Stansted Airport and go to the whatever it is, hotel in a box there out of complete function. But everyone, I don't know everyone, but like, I like to think that everyone would rather stay in a friendly guest house with a human being than a robot. Look, we're going a little bit over time here, but I've got one last question related to size is what have you learned from like having, you know how when you're being creative, like restrictions actually produce creativity? I hope you agree with that. Otherwise my whole pitch is broken. But what can you do in a small space? Whereas, part of you probably goes like, oh, I wish I had 16 floors and a helicopter pad, but you've got what you've got. And what have you discovered, or what can you do? What is it? What has it led you to? I'm going to stop talking now because you know what the question is, but go on.
Yeah. So for me, even if I'd have had the budget, it was very intentional to get a tiny space. So even if I could have afforded a space that was bigger where I could have had private offices and Zoom rooms, I probably wouldn't have done that because my first few experiences with co-working were negative, very disappointing. When I heard about co-working, I thought, this is the future of work. This is fantastic. I can't believe that this amazing concept is out there and people are working in this way.
When was that?
So I was living in Bristol, and this was 2009, 2010. So I think co-working as a concept only been around since 2005. So it's very new. There weren't that many spaces in the UK, but there were a couple in Bristol where I lived. So I straight away wanted to try it out and go and give co-working a go. And I was massively disappointed because the first space that I went to, it might have been run by the council. I can't quite remember. Or it was some kind of corporate-y type space. And I went down there very excited of all the new people that I was going to meet in this new community that I would make. And that just didn't happen. I walked into a vast, open, empty space. There were a few people dotted around. I couldn't bring myself to just enter their personal space to introduce myself out of nowhere as a stranger. I'm quite an introvert, so that felt very not easy for me. We did have like coffee mornings where we got together in one of the private offices and had a bit of a chat for like 20 minutes. But once that was over, it was kind of over. And I just felt very uncomfortable going around introducing myself to these people. Eventually that space shut down, and I wasn't surprised at all because there was really no sense of community or belonging there. I joined another one that was more aimed towards creatives. But again, I had the same problem because I wasn't able to go up to all these people that I didn't know and just start talking. I found it quite hard to integrate into the community that was there, if there was one. I couldn't even detect an existing community there. So those experiences were quite negative. So when I decided to open my own space, I thought to myself, right, what I need to do is open a tiny one so that I won't have that issue of a vast empty space where people don't feel like they can talk to one another. It has to be homely enough and small enough that it forces interaction and engagement between the people who are there. So the fact that in our large office, we've got my desk and 5 others, you're sitting like 2 meters, 3 meters away from the next person. It feels so uncomfortable not to talk to each other that you really have to. And conversations just happen organically. If one person talks to another person, the person sitting next to them just joins in, because you can't really you can't really ignore what's happening around you. So the community aspect of it is massively fast-tracked because of the conversations that happen all throughout the day. So 5 people in a room working together for 8 hours get to know each other probably take about a year of getting to know people in a bigger space where you have to make the effort to walk over to them and talk to them about something or bump into them making coffee, because the proximity of sitting in a small space means that you just can't avoid getting sucked into that community.
So like with all that bit you just said, Stacey, here in Fento co-working in Vigo, there's like 10 desks and we're in that like small room environment, like you said, where there's just 5 people. And we all just go and have lunch together. We're all in this like rhythm together, and in a very cute way, everyone in our co-working space, our children go to the school nearby, and that's how our place evolves. So the point I want to make is it doesn't feel like going to work, even though when we're there, we work. It's like walking into a room, doing your stuff, having lunch, and going back and doing your stuff, and there's just some rhythm that I think is only achievable with a small space, and that is the smallest space I've ever been in. So is there any like last point you want to make, or shout out to the Totnes brothers and sisters?
No, I think what you just said is really important. I think people might be a bit scared to start a small space because it does have that imposter syndrome. But I think if you've got a will to create your own community and start a co-working space, starting small is a brilliant way to do it because there's less financial implications. You've got more flexibility and you can build that community a lot quicker. So I think starting a small space is an amazing idea. And if, like me, you are risk averse, or you're a woman with all those other barriers to deal with, starting a small space can be just a brilliant way to get going.
Thank you. I am wildly energized from what you've heard here, folks, and the other 6 hours that we spent talking about blogging and co-working beforehand. Stacey, where's the best place to find you on the internet?
So all the social media handles for the tribe is at the tribe co-works, but I mostly spend time on Instagram.
That's where all the cool kids are. There's links in the show notes to all of that, folks. And this should be out before European Co-working Day. And if you're chugging around Totnes, you can go to see Stacy in tribe for European Co-working Day. And there'll be a link in the show note to European Co-working Day. And thank you very much for your time and attention today. And I've forgotten how to finish this, but I'm just going to be... that's what I always say. Be careful out there. It's a jungle. Cheers, folks.